It's not a bad life, he would observe philosophically. And I guess somebody has to do it. He had wisdom enough to understand that digging holes in Colorado was not such a bad assignment in wartime. Since the holes were in no great demand, he could dig them and fill them up at a leisurely pace, and he was seldom overworked. On the other hand, he was busted down to buck private each time he was court-martialed. He regretted this loss of rank keenly. It was kind of nice being a PFC, he reminisced yearningly. I had status, you know what I mean, and I used to travel in the best circles. His face darkened with resignation. But that's all behind me now, he guessed. The next time I go over the hill it will be as a buck private, and I just know it won't be the same. There was no future in digging holes. The job isn't even steady. I lose it each time I finish serving my sentence. Then I have to go over the hill again if I want it back. And I can't even keep doing that. There's a catch. Catch-22. The next time I go over the hill, it will mean the stockade. I don't know what's going to become of me. I might even wind up overseas if I'm not careful. He did not want to keep digging holes for the rest of his life, although he had no objection to doing it as long as there was a war going on and it was part of the war effort. It's a matter of duty, he observed, and we each have our own to perform. My duty is to keep digging these holes, and I've been doing such a good job of it that I've just been recommended for the Good Conduct Medal. Your duty is to screw around in cadet school and hope the war ends before you get out. The duty of the men in combat is to win the war, and I just wish they were doing their duty as well as I've been doing mine. It wouldn't be fair if I had to go overseas and do their job too, would it? One day ex-PFC Wintergreen struck open a water pipe while digging in one of his holes and almost drowned to death before he was fished out nearly unconscious. Word spread that it was oil, and Chief White Halfout was kicked off the base. Soon every man who could find a shovel was outside digging frenziedly for oil. Dirt flew everywhere. The scene was almost like the morning in Pianosa 7 months later after the night Milo bombed the squadron with every plane he had accumulated in his M&M syndicate, and the airfield, bomb dump and repair hangars as well, and all the survivors were outside hacking cavernous shelters into the solid ground and roofing them over with sheets of armor plate stolen from the repair sheds at the field and with tattered squares of waterproof canvas stolen from the side flaps of each other's tents. Chief White Halfout was transferred out of Colorado at the first rumor of oil and came to rest finally in Pianosa as a replacement for Lieutenant Coombs, who had gone out on a mission as a guest one day just to see what combat was like and had died over Ferrara in the plane with Kraft. Yossarian felt guilty each time he remembered Kraft, guilty because Kraft had been killed on Yossarian's second bomb run, and guilty because Kraft had got mixed up innocently also in the splendid Atabrin insurrection that had begun in Puerto Rico on the first leg of their flight overseas and ended in Pianosa 10 days later with Appleby striding dutifully into the orderly room the moment he arrived to report Yossarian for refusing to take his Atabrin tablets. The sergeant there invited him to be seated. "Thank you, Sergeant, I think I will," said Appleby. "About how long will I have to wait? I've still got a lot to get done today so that I can be fully prepared bright and early tomorrow morning to go into combat the minute they want me to." "Sir? What's that, Sergeant? What was your question?" "About how long will I have to wait before I can go in to see the Major?" "Just until he goes out to lunch," Sergeant Tozer replied. "Then you can go right in." "But he won't be there then." "Will he?" "No, sir. Major won't be back in his office until after lunch." "I see," Appleby decided uncertainly. "I think I'd better come back after lunch, then." Appleby turned from the orderly room in secret confusion. The moment he stepped outside, he thought he saw a tall, dark officer who looked a little like Henry Fonda come jumping out of the window of the orderly room tent and go scooting out of sight around the corner. Appleby halted and squeezed his eyes closed. An anxious doubt assailed him. He wondered if he were suffering from malaria, or, worse, from an overdose of Atabrin tablets. Appleby had been taking 4 times as many Atobrine tablets as the amount prescribed because he wanted to be 4 times as good a pilot as everyone else. His eyes were still shut when Sergeant Tozer tapped him lightly on the shoulder and told him he could go in now if he wanted to, since Major had just gone out. Appleby's confidence returned. "Thank you, Sergeant. Will he be back soon?" "He'll be back right after lunch." "Then you'll have to go right out and wait for him in front till he leaves for dinner." Major never sees anyone in his office while he's in his office." "Sergeant, what did you just say?" "I said that Major never sees anyone in his office while he's in his office." Appleby stared at Sergeant Tozer intently and attempted a firm tone. "Sergeant, are you trying to make a fool out of me just because I'm new in the squadron and you've been overseas a long time?" "Oh, no, sir," answered the sergeant deferentially. "Those are my orders. You can ask Major when you see him." "That's just what I intend to do, Sergeant. When can I see him?" "Never." Crimson with humiliation, Appleby wrote down his report about Yossarian and the Atobrine tablets on a pad the sergeant offered him and left quickly, wondering if perhaps Yossarian were not the only man privileged to wear an officer's uniform who was crazy. By the time Colonel Cathcart had raised the number of missions to 55, Sergeant Tozer had begun to suspect that perhaps every man who wore a uniform was crazy. Sergeant Tozer was lean and angular and had fine blonde hair so light it was almost without color, sunken cheeks, and teeth like large white marshmallows. He ran the squadron and was not happy doing it. Men like Hungry Joe glowered at him with blameful hatred, and Appleby subjected him to vindictive discourtesy now that he had established himself as a hot pilot and a ping-pong player who never lost a point. Sergeant Tozer ran the squadron because there was no one else in the squadron to run it. He had no interest in war or advancement. He was interested in shards and Hepplewhite furniture. Almost without realizing it, Sergeant Tozer had fallen into the habit of thinking of the dead man in Yossarian's tent in Yossarian's own terms, as a dead man in Yossarian's tent. In reality, he was no such thing. He was simply a replacement pilot who had been killed in combat before he had officially reported for duty. He had stopped at the operations tent to inquire the way to the orderly room tent and had been sent right into action because so many men had completed the 35 missions required then that Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren were finding it difficult to assemble the number of crews specified by group. Because he had never officially gotten into the squadron, he could never officially be gotten out, and Sergeant Tozer sensed that the multiplying communications relating to the poor man would continue reverberating forever. His name was Mud. To Sergeant Tozer, who deplored violence and waste with equal aversion, it seemed like such an abhorrent extravagance to fly Mud all the way across the ocean just to have him blown into bits over Orvieto less than 2 hours after he arrived. No one could recall who he was or what he had looked like, least of all Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren, who remembered only that a new officer had shown up at the operations tent just in time to be killed and who colored uneasily every time the matter of the dead man in Yossarian's tent was mentioned. The only one who might have seen Mud, the men in the same plane, had all been blown to bits with him. Yossarian, on the other hand, knew exactly who Mud was. Mud was the unknown soldier who had never had a chance, for that was the only thing anyone ever did know about all the unknown soldiers, they never had a chance. They had to be dead. And this dead one was really unknown, even though his belongings still lay in a tumble on the cot in Yossarian's tent almost exactly as he had left them 3 months earlier the day he never arrived, all contaminated with death less than 2 hours later. In the same way that all was contaminated with death in the very next week during the great big siege of Bologna when the moldy odor of mortality hung wet in the air with the sulphurous fog and every man scheduled to fly was already tainted. There was no escaping the mission to Bologna once Colonel Cathcart had volunteered his group for the ammunition dumps there that the heavy bombers on the Italian mainland had been unable to destroy from their higher altitudes. Each day's delay deepened the awareness and deepened the gloom. The clinging, Overpowering conviction of death spread steadily with the continuing rainfall, soaking mordantly into each man's ailing countenance like the corrosive blot of some crawling disease. Everyone smelled of formaldehyde. There was nowhere to turn for help, not even to the medical tent, which had been ordered closed by Colonel Corn so that no one could report for sick call, as the men had done on the one clear day with a mysterious epidemic of diarrhea that had forced still another postponement. With sick call suspended and the door to the medical tent nailed shut, Doc Danica spent the intervals between rain perched on a high stool, wordlessly absorbing the bleak outbreak of fear with a sorrowing neutrality, roosting like a melancholy buzzard below the ominous, hand-lettered sign tacked up on the closed door of the medical tent by Captain Black as a joke and left hanging there by Doc Danica because it was no joke. The sign was bordered in dark crayon and read, "Closed until further notice. Death in the family." The fear flowed everywhere, into Dunbar's squadron, where Dunbar poked his head inquiringly through the entrance of the medical tent there one twilight and spoke respectfully to the blurred outline of Dr. Stubbs, who was sitting in the dense shadows inside before a bottle of whiskey and a bell jar filled with purified drinking water. "Are you all right?" he asked solicitously. "Terrible," Dr. Stubbs answered. "What are you doing here?" "Sitting." "I thought there was no more sick call." "There ain't." "Then why are you sitting here?" "Where else should I sit? At the goddamn officers' club with Colonel Cathcart and Corn? Do you know what I'm doing here?" "Sitting." "In the squadron, I mean. Not in the tent. Don't be such a goddamn wise guy. Can you figure out what a doctor is doing here in the squadron?" "They've got the doors to the medical tents nailed shut in the other squadrons," Dunbar remarked. "If anyone sick walks through my door I'm going to ground him," Dr. Stubbs vowed. "I don't give a damn what they say." "You can't ground anyone," Dunbar reminded. "Don't you know the orders? I'll knock him flat on his ass with an injection and really ground him." Dr. Stubbs laughed with sardonic amusement at the prospect. "They think they can order sick call out of existence. The bastards. Oops, there it goes again." The rain began falling again, first in the trees, then in the mud puddles, then, faintly, like a soothing murmur, on the tent top. "Everything's wet," Dr. Stubbs observed with revulsion. "Even the latrines and urinals are backing up in protest. The whole goddamn world smells like a charnel house." The silence seemed bottomless when he stopped talking. Night fell. There was a sense of vast isolation. "Turn on the light," Dunbar suggested. "There is no light. I don't feel like starting my generator. I used to get a big kick out of saving people's lives. Now I wonder what the hell's the point, since they all have to die anyway." "Oh, there's a point, all right," Dunbar assured him. "Is there? What is the point?" "The point is to keep them from dying for as long as you can." "Yeah, but what's the point, since they all have to die anyway?" "The trick is not to think about that." "Never mind the trick. What the hell's the point?" Dunbar pondered in silence for a few moments. Who the hell knows? Dunbar didn't know. Baloney should have exalted Dunbar, because the minutes dawdled and the hours dragged like centuries. Instead it tortured him, because he knew he was going to be killed. "Do you really want some more codeine?" Dr. Stubbs asked. "It's for my friend Yossarian. He's sure he's going to be killed." "Yossarian? Who the hell is Yossarian? What the hell kind of a name is Yossarian, anyway? Isn't he the one who got drunk and started that fight with Colonel Corn at the officers' club the other night?" "That's right. He's a Syrian. That crazy bastard." "He's not so crazy," Dunbar said. "He swears he's not going to fly to Bologna." "That's just what I mean," Dr. Stubbs answered. "That crazy bastard may be the only sane one left." 11 Captain Black Corporal Kolodny learned about it first in a phone call from Group and was so shaken by the news that he crossed the intelligence tent on tiptoe to Captain Black, who was resting drowsily with his bladed shins up on the desk, and relayed the information to him in a shocked whisper. Captain Black brightened immediately. "Baloney!" he exclaimed with delight. "Well, I'll be damned." He broke into loud laughter. Baloney, huh? He laughed again and shook his head in pleasant amazement. Oh, boy. I can't wait to see those bastards' faces when they find out they're going to baloney. Ha, ha, ha. It was the first really good laugh Captain Black had enjoyed since the day Major outsmarted him and was appointed squadron commander, and he rose with torpid enthusiasm and stationed himself behind the front counter in order to wring the most enjoyment from the occasion when the bombardiers arrived for their map kits. That's right, you bastards, baloney, he kept repeating to all the bombardiers who inquired incredulously if they were really going to baloney. Ha. 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 Eat your livers, you bastards. This time you're really in for it. Captain Black followed the last of them outside to observe with relish the effect of the knowledge upon all of the other officers and enlisted men who were assembling with their helmets, parachutes and flak suits around the four trucks idling in the center of the squadron area. He was a tall, narrow, disconsolate man who moved with a crabby listlessness. He shaved his pinched, pale face every third or fourth day, and most of the time he appeared to be growing a reddish-gold mustache over his skinny upper lip. He was not disappointed in the scene outside. There was consternation darkening every expression, and Captain Black yawned deliciously, rubbed the last lethargy from his eyes and laughed gloatingly each time he told someone else to eat his liver. Baloney turned out to be the most rewarding event in Captain Black's life since the day Major Duluth was killed over Perugia and he was almost selected to replace him. When word of Major Duluth's death was radioed back to the field, Captain Black responded with a surge of joy. Although he had never really contemplated the possibility before, Captain Black understood at once that he was the logical man to succeed Major Duluth as squadron commander. To begin with, he was the squadron intelligence officer, which meant he was more intelligent than everyone else in the squadron. True, he was not on combat status, as Major Duluth had been and as all squadron commanders customarily were, but this was really another powerful argument in his favor, since his life was in no danger and he would be able to fill the post for as long as his country needed him. The more Captain Black thought about it, the more inevitable it seemed. It was merely a matter of dropping the right word in the right place quickly. He hurried back to his office to determine a course of action. Settling back in his swivel chair, his feet up on the desk and his eyes closed, he began imagining how beautiful everything would be once he was squadron commander. While Captain Black was imagining, Colonel Cathcart was acting, and Captain Black was flabbergasted by the speed with which, he concluded, Major had outsmarted him. His great dismay at the announcement of Major's appointment as squadron commander was tinged with an embittered resentment he made no effort to conceal. When fellow administrative officers expressed astonishment at Colonel Cathcart's choice of Major, Captain Black muttered that there was something funny going on. When they speculated on the political value of Major's resemblance to Henry Fonda, Captain Black asserted that Major really was Henry Fonda, and when they remarked that Major was somewhat odd, Captain Black announced that he was a communist. "They are taking over everything," he declared rebelliously. "Well, you fellows can stand around and let them if you want to, but I'm not going to. I'm going to do something about it. From now on I'm going to make every son of a bitch who comes to my intelligence tent sign a loyalty oath. And I'm not going to let that bastard Major sign one even if he wants to." Almost overnight the glorious loyalty oath crusade was in full flower, and Captain Black was enraptured to discover himself spearheading it. He had really hit on something. All the enlisted men and officers on combat duty had to sign a loyalty oath to get their map cases from the intelligence tent, a second loyalty oath to receive their flak suits and parachutes from the parachute tent, a third loyalty oath for Lieutenant Buckington, the motor vehicle officer, to be allowed to ride from the squadron to the airfield in one of the trucks. Every time they turned around there was another loyalty oath to be signed. They signed a loyalty oath to get their pay from the finance officer, to obtain their PX supplies, to have their hair cut by the Italian barbers. To Captain Black, every officer who supported his glorious loyalty oath crusade was a competitor, And he planned and plotted 24 hours a day to keep one step ahead. He would stand second to none in his devotion to country. When other officers had followed his urging and introduced loyalty oaths of their own, he went them one better by making every son of a bitch who came to his intelligence tent sign 2 loyalty oaths, then 3, then 4, then he introduced the Pledge of Allegiance, and after that the Star-Spangled Banner, 1 chorus, 2 choruses, 3 choruses, 4 choruses. Each time Captain Black forged ahead of his competitors, he swung upon them scornfully for their failure to follow his example. Each time they followed his example, he retreated with concern and racked his brain for some new stratagem that would enable him to turn upon them scornfully again. Without realizing how it had come about, the combat men in the squadron discovered themselves dominated by the administrators appointed to serve them. They were bullied, insulted, harassed and shoved about all day long by one after the other. When they voiced objection, Captain Black replied that people who were loyal would not mind signing all the loyalty oaths they had to. To anyone who questioned the effectiveness of the loyalty oaths, he replied that people who really did owe allegiance to their country would be proud to pledge it as often as he forced them to. And to anyone who questioned the morality, he replied that the Star-Spangled Banner was the greatest piece of music ever composed. The more loyalty oaths a person signed, the more loyal he was. To Captain Black it was as simple as that, and he had Corporal Cologne sign hundreds with his name each day so that he could always prove he was more loyal than anyone else. The important thing is to keep them pledging, he explained to his cohorts. It doesn't matter whether they mean it or not. That's why they make little kids pledge allegiance even before they know what pledge and allegiance mean. To Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren, the glorious loyalty oath crusade was a glorious pain in the ass, since it complicated their task of organizing the crews for each combat mission. Men were tied up all over the squadron signing, pledging and singing, and the missions took hours longer to get underway. Effective emergency action became impossible, but Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren were both too timid to raise any outcry against Captain Black, who scrupulously enforced each day the doctrine of continual reaffirmation that he had originated, a doctrine designed to trap all those men who had become disloyal since the last time they had signed a loyalty oath the day before. It was Captain Black who came with advice to Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren as they pitched about in their bewildering predicament. He came with a delegation and advised them bluntly to make each man sign a loyalty oath before allowing him to fly on a combat mission. Of course, it's up to you, Captain Black pointed out. Nobody's trying to pressure you. But everyone else is making them sign loyalty oaths, and it's going to look mighty funny to the FBI if you two are the only ones who don't care enough about your country to make them sign loyalty oaths, too. If you want to get a bad reputation, that's nobody's business but your own. All we're trying to do is help. Milo was not convinced and absolutely refused to deprive Major of food, even if Major was a communist, which Milo secretly doubted. Milo was by nature opposed to any innovation that threatened to disrupt the normal course of affairs. Milo took a firm moral stand and absolutely refused to participate in the glorious loyalty oath crusade until Captain Black called upon him with his delegation and requested him to. National defense is everybody's job, Captain Black replied to Milo's objection. This whole program is voluntary, Milo, don't forget that. The men don't have to sign Pilchard and Wren's loyalty oath if they don't want to. But we need you to starve them to death if they don't. It's just like Catch-22. Don't you get it? You're not against Catch-22, are you? Doc Danica was adamant. What makes you so sure Major is a communist? You never heard him denying it until we began accusing him, did you? And you don't see him signing any of our loyalty oaths. You aren't letting him sign any. Of course not, Captain Black explained. That would defeat the whole purpose of our crusade. Look, you don't have to play ball with us if you don't want to. But what's the point of the rest of us working so hard if you're going to give Major medical attention the minute Milo begins starving him to death? I just wonder what they're going to think up at group about the man who's undermining our whole security program. They'll probably transfer you to the Pacific." Danica surrendered swiftly. "I'll go tell Gus and Wes to do whatever you want them to." Up at group, Colonel Cathcart had already begun wondering what was going on. "It's that idiot Black off on a patriotism binge," Colonel Corn reported with a smile. "I think you'd better play ball with him for a while, since you're the one who promoted Major to squadron commander." "That was your idea," Colonel Cathcart accused him petulantly. "I never should have let you talk me into it." "And a very good idea it was, too," retorted Colonel Corn, "since it eliminated that superfluous major that's been giving you such an awful black eye as an administrator. Don't worry, this will probably run its course soon. The best thing to do now is send Captain Black a letter of total support and hope he drops dead before he does too much damage." Colonel Corn was struck with a whimsical thought. "I wonder. You don't suppose that imbecile will try to turn Major out of his trailer, do you?" "The next thing we've got to do is turn that bastard Major out of his trailer," Captain Black decided. "I'd like to turn his wife and kids out into the woods, too. But we can't. He has no wife and kids. So we'll just have to make do with what we have and turn him out." "Who's in charge of the tents?" "He is. You see?" cried Captain Black. "They're taking over everything. Well, I'm not going to stand for it. I'll take this matter right to Major DeCoverley himself if I have to. I'll have Milo speak to him about it the minute he gets back from Rome." Captain Black had boundless faith in the wisdom, power and justice of Major DeCoverley, even though he had never spoken to him before and still found himself without the courage to do so. He deputized Milo to speak to Major DeCoverley for him and stormed about impatiently as he waited for the tall executive officer to return. Along with everyone else in the squadron, he lived in profound awe and reverence of the majestic, white-haired major with craggy face and Jehovian bearing, who came back from Rome finally with an injured eye inside a new celluloid eye patch and smashed his whole glorious crusade to bits with a single stroke. Milo carefully said nothing when Major DeCoverley stepped into the mess hall with his fierce and austere dignity the day he returned and found his way blocked by a wall of officers waiting in line to sign loyalty oaths. At the far end of the food counter, a group of men who had arrived earlier were pledging allegiance to the flag, with trays of food balanced in one hand, in order to be allowed to take seats at the table. Already at the tables, a group that had arrived still earlier was singing the Star-Spangled Banner in order that they might use the salt and pepper and ketchup there. The hubbub began to subside slowly as Major DeCoverley paused in the doorway with a frown of puzzled disapproval, as though viewing something bizarre. He started forward in a straight line, and the wall of officers before him parted like the Red Sea. Glancing neither left nor right, he strode indomitably up to the steam counter and, in a clear, full-bodied voice that was gruff with age and resonant with ancient eminence and authority, said, "Gimme eat." Instead of eat, Corporal Snark gave Major DeCoverley a loyalty oath to sign. Major DeCoverley swept it away with mighty displeasure the moment he recognized what it was, his good eye flaring up blindingly with fiery disdain and his enormous old corrugated face darkening in mountainous wrath. "Gimme eat," I said, he ordered loudly in harsh tones that rumbled ominously through the silent tent like claps of distant thunder. Corporal Snark turned pale and began to tremble. He glanced toward Milo pleadingly for guidance. For several terrible seconds there was not a sound. Then Milo nodded. "Give him eat," he said. Corporal Snark began giving Major DeCoverley eat. Major DeCoverley turned from the counter with his tray full and came to a stop. His eyes fell on the groups of other officers gazing at him in mute appeal, and, with righteous belligerence, he roared, "Give everybody eat! Give everybody eat!" Milo echoed with joyful relief, and the glorious loyalty oath crusade came to an end. Captain Black was deeply disillusioned by this treacherous stab in the back from someone in high place upon whom he had relied so confidently for support. Major DeCoverley had let him down. "Oh, it doesn't bother me a bit," He responded cheerfully to everyone who came to him with sympathy. We completed our task. Our purpose was to make everyone we don't like afraid and to alert people to the danger of major, and we certainly succeeded at that. Since we weren't going to let him sign loyalty oaths anyway, it doesn't really matter whether we have them or not. Seeing everyone in the squadron he didn't like afraid once again throughout the appalling, interminable great big siege of Bologna reminded Captain Black nostalgically of the good old days of his glorious loyalty oath crusade when he had been a man of real consequence, and when even big shots like Milo Minderbinder, Doc Danica and Pilchard and Wren had trembled at his approach and groveled at his feet. To prove to newcomers that he really had been a man of consequence once, he still had the letter of commendation he had received from Colonel Cathcart. 12 Bologna. Actually, it was not Captain Black but Sergeant Knight who triggered the solemn panic of Bologna, slipping silently off the truck for 2 extra flak suits as soon as he learned the target and signaling the start of the grim procession back into the parachute tent that degenerated into a frantic stampede finally before all the extra flak suits were gone. "Hey, what's going on?" Kid Sampson asked nervously. "Bologna can't be that rough, can it?" Nately, sitting trance-like on the floor of the truck, held his grave young face in both hands and did not answer him. It was Sergeant Knight and the cruel series of postponements, for just as they were climbing up into their planes that first morning, along came a jeep with the news that it was raining in Bologna and that the mission would be delayed. It was raining in Pianosa too by the time they returned to the squadron, and they had the rest of that day to stare woodenly at the bomb line on the map under the awning of the intelligence tent and ruminate hypnotically on the fact that there was no escape. The evidence was there vividly in the narrow red ribbon tacked across the mainland. The ground forces in Italy were pinned down 42 insurmountable miles south of the target and could not possibly capture the city in time. Nothing could save the men in Pianosa from the mission to Bologna. They were trapped. Their only hope was that it would never stop raining, and they had no hope because they all knew it would. When it did stop raining in Pianosa, it rained in Bologna. When it stopped raining in Bologna, it began again in Pianosa. If there was no rain at all, there were freakish, inexplicable phenomena like the epidemic of diarrhea or the bomb line that moved. 4 times during the first 6 days they were assembled and briefed and then sent back. Once, they took off and were flying in formation when the control tower summoned them down. The more it rained, the worse they suffered. The more they prayed that it would continue raining. All through the night, men looked at the sky and were saddened by the stars. All through the day, they looked at the bomb line on the big, wobbling easel map of Italy that blew over in the wind and was dragged in under the awning of the intelligence tent every time the rain began. The bomb line was a scarlet band of narrow satin ribbon that delineated the forwardmost position of the Allied ground forces in every sector of the Italian mainland. The morning after Hungry Joe's fist fight with Hoople's cat, the rain stopped falling in both places. The landing strip began to dry. It would take a full 24 hours to harden, but the sky remained cloudless. The resentments incubating in each man hatched into hatred. First they hated the infantrymen on the mainland because they had failed to capture Bologna. Then they began to hate the bomb line itself. For hours they stared relentlessly at the scarlet ribbon on the map and hated it because it would not move up high enough to encompass the city. When night fell, they congregated in the darkness with flashlights, continuing their macabre vigil at the bomb line in brooding entreaty as though hoping to move the ribbon up by the collective weight of their sullen prayers. "I really can't believe it," Clevinger exclaimed to Yossarian in a voice rising and falling in protest and wonder. "It's a complete reversion to primitive superstition. They're confusing cause and effect. It makes as much sense as knocking on wood or crossing your fingers. They really believe that we wouldn't have to fly that mission tomorrow if someone would only tiptoe up to the map in the middle of the night and move the bomb line over Bologna. Can you imagine? You and I must be the only rational ones left." In the middle of the night Yossarian knocked on wood, crossed his fingers, and tiptoed out of his tent to move the bomb line up over Bologna. Corporal Kolodny tiptoed stealthily into Captain Black's tent early the next morning, reached inside the mosquito net and gently shook the moist shoulder blade he found there until Captain Black opened his eyes. "What are you waking me up for?" whimpered Captain Black. "They captured Bologna, sir," said Corporal Kolodny. "I thought you'd want to know. Is the mission cancelled?" Captain Black tugged himself erect and began scratching his scrawny long thighs methodically. In a little while he dressed and emerged from his tent, squinting, cross and unshaven. The sky was clear and warm. He peered without emotion at the map. Sure enough, they had captured Bologna. Inside the intelligence tent, Corporal Kolodny was already removing the maps of Bologna from the navigation kits. Captain Black seated himself with a loud yawn, lifted his feet to the top of his desk and phoned Colonel Corn. "What are you waking me up for?" whimpered Colonel Corn. "They captured Bologna during the night, sir." "Is the mission cancelled?" "What are you talking about, Black?" Colonel Corn growled. "Why should the mission be cancelled?" "Because they captured Bologna, sir." "Isn't the mission cancelled?" "Of course the mission is cancelled. Do you think we're bombing our own troops now?" "What are you waking me up for?" Colonel Cathcart whimpered to Colonel Corn. "They captured Bologna," Colonel Corn told him. "I thought you'd want to know." "Who captured Bologna?" "We did." Colonel Cathcart was overjoyed, for he was relieved of the embarrassing commitment to bomb Bologna without blemish to the reputation for valor he had earned by volunteering his men to do it. General Dreedel was pleased with the capture of Bologna, too, although he was angry with Colonel Moodus for waking him up to tell him about it. Headquarters was also pleased and decided to award a medal to the officer who captured the city. There was no officer who had captured the city, so they gave the medal to General Peckham instead, because General Peckham was the only officer with sufficient initiative to ask for it. As soon as General Peckham had received his medal, he began asking for increased responsibility. It was General Peckham's opinion that all combat units in the theater should be placed under the jurisdiction of the Special Service Corps, of which General Peckham himself was the commanding officer. If dropping bombs on the enemy was not a special service, he reflected aloud frequently with the martyred smile of sweet reasonableness that was his loyal confederate in every dispute, then he could not help wondering what in the world was. With amiable regret, he declined the offer of a combat post under General Dreedel. "Flying combat missions for General Dreedel is not exactly what I had in mind," he explained indulgently with a smooth laugh. "I was thinking more in terms of replacing General Dreedel, or perhaps of something above General Dreedel where I could exercise supervision over a great many other generals too. You see, my most precious abilities are mainly administrative ones. I have a happy facility for getting different people to agree." "He has a happy facility for getting different people to agree. What a prick he is," Colonel Cargill confided invidiously to XPFC Wintergreen in the hope that XPFC Wintergreen would spread the unfavorable report along through 27th Air Force Headquarters. "If anyone deserves that combat post, I do. It was even my idea that we ask for the medal." "You really want to go into combat?" XPFC Wintergreen inquired. "Combat?" Colonel Cargill was aghast. "Oh, no, you misunderstand me. Of course, I wouldn't actually mind going into combat, but my best abilities are mainly administrative ones. I too have a happy facility for getting different people to agree." "He too has a happy facility for getting different people to agree. What a prick he is," XPFC Wintergreen confided with a laugh to Yassarian, after he had come to Pianosa to learn if it was really true about Milo and the Egyptian cotton. "If anyone deserves a promotion, I do." Actually, he had risen already to ex-corporal, having shot through the ranks shortly after his transfer to 27th Air Force Headquarters as a mail clerk and been busted right down to private for making odious audible comparisons about the commissioned officers for whom he worked. The heady taste of success had infused him further with morality and fired him with ambition for loftier attainments. "Do you want to buy some Zippo lighters?" he asked Yassarian. "They were stolen right from quartermaster." "Does Milo know you're selling cigarette lighters?" What's it his business? Milo's not carrying cigarette lighters too now, is he? He sure is, Yossarian told him. And his aren't stolen. That's what you think, XPFC Wintergreen answered with a laconic snort. I'm selling mine for $1 apiece. What's he getting for his? $1 and a penny. XPFC Wintergreen snickered triumphantly. I beat him every time, he gloated. Say, what about all that Egyptian cotton he's stuck with? How much did he buy? All. In the whole world? Well, I'll be damned. XPFC Wintergreen crowed with malicious glee. What a dope. You were in Cairo with him. Why'd you let him do it? Me? Yossarian answered with a shrug. I have no influence on him. It was those teletype machines they have in all the good restaurants there. Milo had never seen a stock ticker before, and the quotation for Egyptian cotton happened to be coming in just as he asked the head waiter to explain it to him. Egyptian cotton? Milo said with that look of his. How much is Egyptian cotton selling for? The next thing I knew he had bought the whole goddamn harvest. And now he can't unload any of it. He has no imagination. I can unload plenty of it in the black market if you'll make a deal. Milo knows the black market. There's no demand for cotton. But there is a demand for medical supplies. I can roll the cotton up on wooden toothpicks and peddle them as sterile swabs. Will he sell to me at a good price? He won't sell to you at any price, Yossarian answered. He's pretty sore at you for going into competition with him. In fact, he's pretty sore at everybody for getting diarrhea last weekend and giving his mess hall a bad name. Say, you can help us. Yossarian suddenly seized his arm. Couldn't you forge some official orders on that mimeograph machine of yours and get us out of flying to Bologna? XPFC Wintergreen pulled away slowly with a look of scorn. Sure I could, he explained with pride. But I would never dream of doing anything like that. Why not? Because it's your job. We all have our jobs to do. My job is to unload these Zippoliters at a profit if I can and pick up some cotton from Milo. Your job is to bomb the ammunition dumps at Bologna. But I'm going to be killed at Bologna, Yossarian pleaded. We're all going to be killed. Then you'll just have to be killed, replied XPFC Wintergreen. Why can't you be a fatalist about it the way I am? If I'm destined to unload these lighters at a profit and pick up some Egyptian cotton cheap from Milo, then that's what I'm going to do. And if you're destined to be killed over Bologna, then you're going to be killed, so you might just as well go out and die like a man. I hate to say this, Yossarian, but you're turning into a chronic complainer. Clevinger agreed with XPFC Wintergreen that it was Yossarian's job to get killed over Bologna and was livid with condemnation when Yossarian confessed that it was he who had moved the bomb line and caused the mission to be cancelled. Why the hell not? Yossarian snarled, arguing all the more vehemently because he suspected he was wrong. Am I supposed to get my ass shot off just because the colonel wants to be a general? What about the men on the mainland? Clevinger demanded with just as much emotion. Are they supposed to get their asses shot off just because you don't want to go? Those men are entitled to air support. But not necessarily by me. Look, they don't care who knocks out those ammunition dumps. The only reason we're going is because that bastard Cathcart volunteered us. Oh, I know all that, Clevinger assured him, his gaunt face pale and his agitated brown eyes swimming in sincerity. But the fact remains that those ammunition dumps are still standing. You know very well that I don't approve of Colonel Cathcart any more than you do. Clevinger paused for emphasis, his mouth quivering, and then beat his fist down softly against his sleeping bag. But it's not for us to determine what targets must be destroyed or who's to destroy them or who gets killed doing it. And why? Yes, even that. We have no right to question, you're insane. No right to question, do you really mean that it's not my business how or why I get killed and that it is Colonel Cathcart's? Do you really mean that? Yes, I do, Clevinger insisted, seeming unsure. There are men entrusted with winning the war who are in a much better position than we are to decide what targets have to be bombed. We are talking about two different things, Yossarian answered with exaggerated weariness. You are talking about the relationship of the Air Corps to the infantry, and I am talking about the relationship of me to Colonel Cathcart. You are talking about winning the war, and I am talking about winning the war and keeping alive. Exactly, Clevinger snapped smugly. And which do you think is more important? To whom? Yossarian shot back. Open your eyes, Clevinger. It doesn't make a damned bit of difference who wins the war to someone who's dead. Clevinger sat for a moment as though he'd been slapped. Congratulations! He exclaimed bitterly, the thinnest milk-white line enclosing his lips tightly in a bloodless, squeezing ring. I can't think of another attitude that could be depended upon to give greater comfort to the enemy. The enemy, retorted Yossarian with weighted precision, is anybody who's going to get you killed, no matter which side he's on, and that includes Colonel Cathcart. And don't you forget that, because the longer you remember it, the longer you might live. But Clevinger did forget it, and now he was dead. At the time, Clevinger was so upset by the incident that Yossarian did not dare tell him he had also been responsible for the epidemic of diarrhea that had caused the other unnecessary postponement. Milo was even more upset by the possibility that someone had poisoned his squadron again, and he came bustling fretfully to Yossarian for assistance. Please find out from Corporal Snark if he put laundry soap in the sweet potatoes again, he requested furtively. Corporal Snark trusts you and will tell you the truth if you give him your word you won't tell anyone else. As soon as he tells you, come and tell me. Of course I put laundry soap in the sweet potatoes, Corporal Snark admitted to Yossarian. That's what you asked me to do, isn't it? Laundry soap is the best way. He swears to God he didn't have a thing to do with it, Yossarian reported back to Milo. Milo pouted dubiously. Dunbar says there is no God. There was no hope left. By the middle of the second week, everyone in the squadron began to look like Hungry Joe, who was not scheduled to fly and screamed horribly in his sleep. He was the only one who could sleep. All night long, men moved through the darkness outside their tents like tongueless wraiths with cigarettes. In the daytime they stared at the bomb line in futile, drooping clusters or at the still figure of Doc Danica sitting in front of the closed door of the medical tent beneath the morbid hand-lettered sign. They began to invent humorless, glum jokes of their own and disastrous rumors about the destruction awaiting them at Bologna. Yossarian sidled up drunkenly to Colonel Korn at the officers' club one night to kid with him about the new Lepage gun that the Germans had moved in. What Lepage gun? Colonel Korn inquired with curiosity. The new 344mm Lepage glue gun, Yossarian answered. It glues a whole formation of planes together in midair. Colonel Korn jerked his elbow free from Yossarian's clutching fingers in startled affront. Let go of me, you idiot! He cried out furiously, glaring with vindictive approval as Nately leaped upon Yossarian's back and pulled him away. Who is that lunatic, anyway? Colonel Cathcart chortled merrily. That's the man you made me give a medal to after Ferrara. You had me promote him to captain, too, remember? It serves you right. Nately was lighter than Yossarian and had great difficulty maneuvering Yossarian's lurching bulk across the room to an unoccupied table. Are you crazy? Nately kept hissing with trepidation. That was Colonel Korn. Are you crazy? Yossarian wanted another drink and promised to leave quietly if Nately brought him one. Then he made Nately bring him two more. When Nately finally coaxed him to the door, Captain Black came stomping in from outside, banging his sloshing shoes down hard on the wood floor and spilling water from his eaves like a high roof. Boy, are you bastards in for it! He announced exuberantly, splashing away from the puddle forming at his feet. I just got a call from Colonel Korn. Do you know what they've got waiting for you at Bologna? Ha! Ha! They've got the new Lepage glue gun. It glues a whole formation of planes together in midair. My God, it's true! Yossarian shrieked, and collapsed against Nately in terror. "There is no God," answered Dunbar calmly, coming up with a slight stagger. "Hey, give me a hand with him, will you? I've got to get him back in his tent." "Says who?" "Says me. Gee, look at the rain. We've got to get a car." "Steal Captain Black's car," said Yossarian. "That's what I always do. We can't steal anybody's car. Since you began stealing the nearest car every time you wanted one, nobody leaves the ignition on." "Hop in," said Chief White Half-Oat, driving up drunk in a covered jeep. He waited until they had crowded inside and then spurted ahead with a suddenness that rolled them all over backward. He roared with laughter at their curses. He drove straight ahead when he left the parking lot and rammed the car into the embankment on the other side of the road. The others piled forward in a helpless heap and began cursing him again. "I forgot to turn," he explained. "Be careful, will you?" Natalie cautioned. "You'd better put your headlights on." Chief White Half-Oat pulled back in reverse, made his turn and shot away up the road at top speed. The wheels were sibilant on the whizzing blacktop surface. "Not so fast," urged Natalie. "You'd better take me to your squadron first so I can help you put him to bed. Then you can drive me back to my squadron." "Who the hell are you?" "Dunbar." "Hey, put your headlights on," Natalie shouted. "And watch the road." "They are on. Isn't Yossarian in this car?" "That's the only reason I let the rest of you bastards in." Chief White Half-Oat turned completely around to stare into the back seat. "Watch the road. Yossarian? Is Yossarian in here?" "I'm here, Chief. Let's go home." "What makes you so sure? You never answered my question." "You see? I told you he was here." "What question?" "Whatever it was we were talking about. Was it important?" "I don't remember if it was important or not. I wish to God I knew what it was." "There is no God." "That's what we were talking about," Yossarian cried. "What makes you so sure?" "Hey, are you sure your headlights are on?" Natalie called out. "They're on, they're on. What does he want from me?" "It's all this rain on the windshield that makes it look dark from back there. Beautiful, beautiful rain. I hope it never stops raining. Rain, rain, go way. Come again some oath, day. Little yo-yo wants, to play. In, the meadow, in." Chief White Half-Oat missed the next turn in the road and ran the jeep all the way up to the crest of a steep embankment. Rolling back down, the jeep turned over on its side and settled softly in the mud. There was a frightened silence. "Is everyone all right?" Chief White Half-Oat inquired in a hushed voice. No one was injured, and he heaved a long sigh of relief. "You know, that's my trouble," he groaned. "I never listen to anybody. Somebody kept telling me to put my headlights on, but I just wouldn't listen. I kept telling you to put your headlights on. I know. And I just wouldn't listen, would I? I wish I had a drink. I do have a drink. Look. It's not broken. It's raining in," Natalie noticed. "I'm getting wet." Chief White Half-Oat got the bottle of rye open, drank and handed it off. Lying tangled up on top of each other, they all drank but Natalie, who kept groping ineffectually for the door handle. The bottle fell against his head with a clunk, and whiskey poured down his neck. He began writhing convulsively. "Hey, we've got to get out of here!" he cried. We lolled round. "Is anybody in there?" asked Clevinger with concern, shining a flashlight down from the top. "It's Clevinger!" they shouted, and tried to pull him in through the window as he reached down to aid them. "Look at them!" Clevinger exclaimed indignantly to Mquat, who sat grinning at the wheel of the staff car. "Lying there like a bunch of drunken animals. You too, Natalie? You ought to be ashamed. Come on, help me get them out of here before they all die of pneumonia." "You know, that don't sound like such a bad idea," Chief White Half-Oat reflected. "I think I will die of pneumonia." "Why? Why not?" answered Chief White Half-Oat, and lay back in the mud contentedly with the bottle of rye cuddled in his arms. "Oh, now look what he's doing!" Clevinger exclaimed with irritation. Will you get up and get into the car so we can all go back to the squadron? We can't all go back. Someone has to stay here to help the chief with this car. He signed out of the motor pool. Chief Whitehaft settled back in the staff car with an ebullient, prideful chuckle. That's Captain Black's car, he informed them jubilantly. I stole it from him at the officers' club just now with an extra set of keys he thought he lost this morning. Well, I'll be damned. That calls for a drink. Haven't you had enough to drink? Clevinger began scolding as soon as Mquat started the car. Look at you. You don't care if you drink yourselves to death or drown yourselves to death, do you? Just as long as we don't fly ourselves to death. Hey, open it up, Chief Whitehaft urged Mquat. Unturn off the headlights. That's the only way to do it. Doc Danica is right, Clevinger went on. People don't know enough to take care of themselves. I really am disgusted with all of you. Okay, Fatmouth, out of the car, Chief Whitehaft ordered. Everybody get out of the car but Yossarian. Where's Yossarian? Get the hell off me. Yossarian left, pushing him away. You are all covered with mud. Clevinger focused on Nately. You are the one who really surprises me. Do you know what you smell like? Instead of trying to keep him out of trouble, you get just as drunk as he is. Suppose he got in another fight with Appleby? Clevinger's eyes opened wide with alarm when he heard Yossarian chuckle. He didn't get in another fight with Appleby, did he? Not this time, said Dunbar. No, not this time. This time I did even better. This time he got in a fight with Colonel Corn. He didn't. Gasped Clevinger. He did? Exclaimed Chief Whitehaft with delight. That calls for a drink. But that's terrible. Clevinger declared with deep apprehension. Why in the world did you have to pick on Colonel Corn? Say, what happened to the lights? Why is everything so dark? I turned them off, answered Mquat. You know, Chief Whitehaft is right. It's much better with the headlights off. Are you crazy? Clevinger screamed, and lunged forward to snap the headlights on. He whirled around upon Yossarian in near hysteria. You see what you're doing? You've got them all acting like you. Suppose it stops raining and we have to fly to Bologna tomorrow. You'll be in fine physical condition. It won't ever gonna stop raining. No, sir, a rain like this really might go on forever. It has stopped raining. Someone said, and the whole car fell silent. You poor bastards, Chief Whitehaft murmured compassionately after a few moments had passed. Did it really stop raining? Yossarian asked meekly. Mquat switched off the windshield wipers to make certain. The rain had stopped. The sky was starting to clear. The moon was sharp behind a gauzy brown mist. Oh, well, sang Mquat soberly. What the hell? Don't worry, fellas, Chief Whitehaft said. The landing strip is too soft to use tomorrow. Maybe it'll start raining again before the field dries out. You goddamn stinking lousy son of a bitch, Hungry Joe screamed from his tent as they sped into the squadron. Jesus, is he back here tonight? I thought he was still in Rome with the courier ship. Oh. Oh ooh. Oh ah ooh ooh ooh. Hungry Joe screamed. Chief Whitehaft shuddered. That guy gives me the willies, he confessed in a grouchy whisper. Hey, whatever happened to Captain Flume? There's a guy that gives me the willies. I saw him in the woods last week eating wild berries. He never sleeps in his trailer anymore. He looked like hell. Hungry Joe's afraid he'll have to replace somebody who goes on sick call, even though there is no sick call. Did you see him the other night when he tried to kill Havermeyer and fell into Yossarian's slit trench? Oh ooh! Screamed Hungry Joe. Oh! Oh ooh! Oh ah ooh ooh! It sure is a pleasure not having Flume around in the mess hall anymore. No more of that pass the salt, Walt. Or pass the bread, Fred. Or shoot me a beat, Pete. Keep away, Hungry Joe screamed. I said keep away, you goddamn stinking lousy son of a bitch. At least we found out what he dreams about, Dunbar observed wryly. He dreams about goddamn stinking lousy sons of bitches. Late that night Hungry Joe dreamed that Hoople's cat was sleeping on his face, suffocating him, and when he woke up, Hoople's cat was sleeping on his face. His agony was terrifying, the piercing, unearthly howl with which he split the moonlit dark vibrating in its own impact for seconds afterward like a devastating shock. A numbing silence followed, and then a riotous din rose from inside his tent. Yossarian was among the first ones there. When he burst through the entrance, Hungry Joe had his gun out and was struggling to wrench his arm free from Hoople to shoot the cat, who kept spitting and fainting at him ferociously to distract him from shooting Hoople. Both humans were in their GI underwear. The unfrosted light bulb overhead was swinging crazily on its loose wire, and the jumbled black shadows kept swirling and bobbing chaotically, so that the entire tent seemed to be reeling. Yossarian reached out instinctively for balance and then launched himself forward in a prodigious dive that crushed the three combatants to the ground beneath him. He emerged from the melee with the scruff of a neck in each hand, Hungry Joe's neck and the cat's. Hungry Joe and the cat glared at each other savagely. The cat spat viciously at Hungry Joe, and Hungry Joe tried to hit it with a haymaker. A fair fight, Yossarian decreed, and all the others who had come running to the uproar in horror began cheering ecstatically in a tremendous overflow of relief. "We'll have a fair fight," he explained officially to Hungry Joe and the cat after he had carried them both outside, still holding them apart by the scruffs of their necks. "Fists, fangs and claws. But no guns," he warned Hungry Joe. "No spitting," he warned the cat sternly. "When I turn you both loose, go. Break clean in the clinches and come back fighting. Go." There was a huge, giddy crowd of men who were avid for any diversion, but the cat turned chicken the moment Yossarian released him and fled from Hungry Joe ignominiously like a yellow dog. Hungry Joe was declared the winner. He swaggered away happily with the proud smile of a champion, his shriveled head high and his emaciated chest out. He went back to bed victorious and dreamed again that Hoople's cat was sleeping on his face, suffocating him. 13 Major, de Coverley moving the bomb line did not fool the Germans, but it did fool Major, de Coverley, who packed his musette bag, commandeered an airplane and, under the impression that Florence too had been captured by the Allies, had himself flown to that city to rent 2 apartments for the officers and the enlisted men in the squadron to use on rest leaves. He had still not returned by the time Yossarian jumped back outside Major's office and wondered whom to appeal to next for help. Major, de Coverley was a splendid, awe-inspiring, grave old man with a massive leonine head and an angry shock of wild white hair that raged like a blizzard around his stern, patriarchal face. His duties as squadron executive officer did consist entirely, as both Doc Danica and Major had conjectured, of pitching horseshoes, kidnapping Italian laborers, and renting apartments for the enlisted men and officers to use on rest leaves, and he excelled at all 3. Each time the fall of a city like Naples, Rome or Florence seemed imminent, Major, de Coverley would pack his musette bag, commandeer an airplane and a pilot, and have himself flown away, accomplishing all this without uttering a word, by the sheer force of his solemn, domineering visage and the peremptory gestures of his wrinkled finger. A day or 2 after the city fell, he would be back with leases on 2 large and luxurious apartments there, one for the officers and one for the enlisted men, both already staffed with competent, jolly cooks and maids. A few days after that, newspapers would appear throughout the world with photographs of the first American soldiers bludgeoning their way into the shattered city through rubble and smoke. Inevitably, Major, de Coverley was among them, seated straight as a ramrod in a jeep he had obtained from somewhere, glancing neither right nor left as the artillery fire burst about his invincible head and lithe young infantrymen with carbines went loping up along the sidewalks in the shelter of burning buildings or fell dead in doorways. He seemed eternally indestructible as he sat there surrounded by danger, his features molded firmly into that same fierce, regal, just and forbidding countenance which was recognized and revered by every man in the squadron. To German intelligence, Major de Coverley was a vexatious enigma. Not one of the hundreds of American prisoners would ever supply any concrete information about the elderly white-haired officer with the gnarled and menacing brow and blazing, powerful eyes who seemed to spearhead every important advance so fearlessly and successfully. To American authorities his identity was equally perplexing. A whole regiment of crack CID men had been thrown into the front lines to find out who he was, while a battalion of combat-hardened public relations officers stood on red alert 24 hours a day with orders to begin publicizing him the moment he was located. In Rome, Major de Coverley had outdone himself with the apartments. For the officers, who arrived in groups of 4 or 5, there was an immense double room for each in a new white stone building, with 3 spacious bathrooms with walls of shimmering aquamarine tile and one skinny maid named Michaela who tittered at everything and kept the apartment in spotless order. On the landing below lived the obsequious owners. On a landing above lived the beautiful rich black-haired countess and her beautiful, rich black-haired daughter-in-law, both of whom would put out only for Nately, who was too shy to want them, and for Arfie, who was too stuffy to take them and tried to dissuade them from ever putting out for anyone but their husbands, who had chosen to remain in the north with the family's business interests. "They are really a couple of good kids," Arfie confided earnestly to Yossarian, whose recurring dream it was to have the nude milk-white female bodies of both these beautiful rich black-haired good kids lying stretched out in bed erotically with him at the same time. The enlisted men descended upon Rome in gangs of 12 or more with gargantuan appetites and heavy crates filled with canned food for the women to cook and serve to them in the dining room of their own apartment on the 6th floor of a red brick building with a clinking elevator. There was always more activity at the enlisted men's place. There were always more enlisted men, to begin with, and more women to cook and serve and sweep and scrub, and then there were always the gay and silly sensual young girls that Yossarian had found and brought there and those that the sleepy enlisted men returning to Pianosa after their exhausting 7-day debauch had brought there on their own and were leaving behind for whoever wanted them next. The girls had shelter and food for as long as they wanted to stay. All they had to do in return was hump any of the men who asked them to, which seemed to make everything just about perfect for them. Every 4th day or so Hungry Joe came crashing in like a man in torment, hoarse, wild, and frenetic, if he had been unlucky enough to finish his missions again and was flying the courier ship. Most times he slept at the enlisted men's apartment. Nobody was certain how many rooms Major de Coverley had rented, not even the stout black-bodiced woman in corsets on the 1st floor from whom he had rented them. They covered the whole top floor, and Yossarian knew they extended down to the 5th floor as well, for it was in Snowdon's room on the 5th floor that he had finally found the maid in the lime-colored panties with a dust mop the day after Bologna, after Hungry Joe had discovered him in bed with Luciana at the officer's apartment that same morning and had gone running like a fiend for his camera. The maid in the lime-colored panties was a cheerful, fat, obliging woman in her mid-30s with squashy thighs and swaying hams in lime-colored panties that she was always rolling off for any man who wanted her. She had a plain broad face and was the most virtuous woman alive. She laid for everybody, regardless of race, creed, color or place of national origin, donating herself sociably as an act of hospitality, procrastinating not even for the moment it might take to discard the cloth or broom or dust mop she was clutching at the time she was grabbed. Her allure stemmed from her accessibility. Like Mount Everest, she was there, and the men climbed on top of her each time they felt the urge. Yossarian was in love with the maid in the lime-colored panties because she seemed to be the only woman left he could make love to without falling in love with. Even the bald-headed girl in Sicily still evoked in him strong sensations of pity, tenderness and regret. Despite the multiple perils to which Major de Coverley exposed himself each time he rented apartments, his only injury had occurred, ironically enough, while he was leading the triumphal procession into the open city of Rome, where he was wounded in the eye by a flower fired at him from close range by a seedy, cackling, intoxicated old man, who, like Satan himself, had then bounded upon Major de Coverley's car with malicious glee, seized him roughly and contemptuously by his venerable white head and kissed him mockingly on each cheek with a mouth reeking with sour fumes of wine, cheese and garlic, before dropping back into the joyous celebrating throngs with a hollow, dry, excoriating laugh. Major de Coverley, a Spartan in adversity, did not flinch once throughout the whole hideous ordeal. And not until he had returned to Pianosa, his business in Rome completed, did he seek medical attention for his wound. He resolved to remain binocular and specified to Doc Danica that his eye patch be transparent so that he could continue pitching horseshoes, kidnapping Italian laborers and renting apartments with unimpaired vision. To the men in the squadron, Major de Coverley was a colossus, although they never dared tell him so. The only one who ever did dare address him was Milo Minderbinder, who approached the horseshoe pitching pit with a hard-boiled egg his second week in the squadron and held it aloft for Major de Coverley to see. Major de Coverley straightened with astonishment at Milo's effrontery and concentrated upon him the full fury of his storming countenance with its rugged overhang of gullied forehead and huge crag of a humpbacked nose that came charging out of his face wrathfully like a Big Ten fullback. Milo stood his ground, taking shelter behind the hard-boiled egg raised protectively before his face like a magic charm. In time the gale began to subside, and the danger passed. "What is that?" Major de Coverley demanded at last. "An egg," Milo answered. "What kind of an egg?" Major de Coverley demanded. "A hard-boiled egg," Milo answered. "What kind of a hard-boiled egg?" Major de Coverley demanded. "A fresh hard-boiled egg," Milo answered. "Where did the fresh egg come from?" Major de Coverley demanded. "From a chicken," Milo answered. "Where is the chicken?" Major de Coverley demanded. "The chicken is in Malta," Milo answered. "How many chickens are there in Malta?" "Enough chickens to lay fresh eggs for every officer in the squadron at 5 cents apiece from the mess fund," Milo answered. "I have a weakness for fresh eggs," Major de Coverley confessed. "If someone put a plane at my disposal, I could fly down there once a week in a squadron plane and bring back all the fresh eggs we need," Milo answered. "After all, Malta's not so far away." "Malta's not so far away," Major de Coverley observed. "You could probably fly down there once a week in a squadron plane and bring back all the fresh eggs we need." "Yes," Milo agreed. "I suppose I could do that, if someone wanted me to and put a plane at my disposal. I like my fresh eggs fried," Major de Coverley remembered. "In fresh butter. I can find all the fresh butter we need in Sicily for 25 cents a pound," Milo answered. 25 cents a pound for fresh butter is a good buy. There's enough money in the mess fund for butter too, and we could probably sell some to the other squadrons at a profit and get back most of what we pay for our own." "What's your name, son?" asked Major de Coverley. "My name is Milo Minderbinder, sir. I am 27 years old." "You're a good mess officer, Milo." "I'm not the mess officer, sir." "You're a good mess officer, Milo." "Thank you, sir. I'll do everything in my power to be a good mess officer." "Bless you, my boy. Have a horseshoe." "Thank you, sir. What should I do with it?" "Throw it away. At the peg there. Then pick it up and throw it at this peg. It's a game, see? You get the horseshoe back." "Yes, sir. I see. How much are horseshoes selling for?" The smell of a fresh egg snapping exotically in a pool of fresh butter carried a long way on the Mediterranean trade winds and brought General Dreedel racing back with a voracious appetite, accompanied by his nurse, who accompanied him everywhere, and his son-in-law, Colonel Moodus. In the beginning General Dreedel devoured all his meals in Milo's mess hall. Then the other 3 squadrons in Colonel Cathcart's group turned their mess halls over to Milo and gave him an airplane and a pilot each so that he could buy fresh eggs and fresh butter for them too. Milo's plane shuttled back and forth 7 days a week as every officer in the 4 squadrons began devouring fresh eggs in an insatiable orgy of fresh egg eating. General Dreedel devoured fresh eggs for breakfast, Lunch and dinner, between meals he devoured more fresh eggs, until Milo located abundant sources of fresh veal, beef, duck, baby lamb chops, mushroom caps, broccoli, South African rock lobster tails, shrimp, hams, puddings, grapes, ice cream, strawberries and artichokes. There were 3 other bomb groups in General Dreidels' combat wing, and they each jealously dispatched their own planes to Malta for fresh eggs, but discovered that fresh eggs were selling there for 7 cents apiece. Since they could buy them from Milo for 5 cents apiece, it made more sense to turn over their mess halls to his syndicate, too, and give him the planes and pilots needed to ferry in all the other good food he promised to supply as well. Everyone was elated with this turn of events, most of all Colonel Cathcart, who was convinced he had won a feather in his cap. He greeted Milo jovially each time they met and, in an excess of contrite generosity, impulsively recommended Major for promotion. The recommendation was rejected at once at 27th Air Force Headquarters by XPFC Wintergreen, who scribbled a brusque, unsigned reminder that the Army had only one major and did not intend to lose him by promotion just to please Colonel Cathcart. Colonel Cathcart was stung by the blunt rebuke and skulked guiltily about his room in smarting repudiation. He blamed Major for this black eye and decided to bust him down to lieutenant that very same day. "They probably won't let you," Colonel Corn remarked with a condescending smile, savoring the situation. "For precisely the same reasons that they wouldn't let you promote him. Besides, you'd certainly look foolish trying to bust him down to lieutenant right after you tried to promote him to my rank." Colonel Cathcart felt hemmed in on every side. He had been much more successful in obtaining a medal for Yossarian after the debacle of Ferrara, when the bridge spanning the Po was still standing undamaged 7 days after Colonel Cathcart had volunteered to destroy it. 9 missions his men had flown there in 6 days, and the bridge was not demolished until the 10th mission on the 7th day, when Yossarian killed Kraft and his crew by taking his flight of 6 planes in over the target a second time. Yossarian came in carefully on his second bomb run because he was brave then. He buried his head in his bomb sight until his bombs were away. When he looked up, everything inside the ship was suffused in a weird orange glow. At first he thought that his own plane was on fire. Then he spied the plane with the burning engine directly above him and screamed Tumquat through the intercom to turn left hard. A second later, the wing of Kraft's plane blew off. The flaming wreck dropped, first the fuselage, then the spinning wing, while a shower of tiny metal fragments began tap dancing on the roof of Yossarian's own plane, and the incessant kashung, kashung, kashung of the flak was still thumping all around him. Back on the ground, every eye watched grimly as he walked in dull dejection up to Captain Black outside the green clapboard briefing room to make his intelligence report and learn that Colonel Cathcart and Colonel Corn were waiting to speak to him inside. Major Danby stood barring the door, waving everyone else away in ashen silence. Yossarian was leaden with fatigue and longed to remove his sticky clothing. He stepped into the briefing room with mixed emotions, uncertain how he was supposed to feel about Kraft and the others, for they had all died in the distance of a mute and secluded agony at a moment when he was up to his own ass in the same vile, excruciating dilemma of duty and damnation. Colonel Cathcart, on the other hand, was all broken up by the event. "Twice?" he asked. "I would have missed it the first time," Yossarian replied softly, his face lowered. Their voices echoed slightly in the long, narrow bungalow. "But twice?" Colonel Cathcart repeated, in vivid disbelief. "I would have missed it the first time," Yossarian repeated. "But Kraft would be alive. And the bridge would still be up. A trained bombardier is supposed to drop his bombs the first time," Colonel Cathcart reminded him. "The other 5 bombardiers dropped their bombs the first time." "And missed the target," Yossarian said. "We'd have had to go back there again. And maybe you would have gotten it the first time then. And maybe I wouldn't have gotten it at all. But maybe there wouldn't have been any losses. And maybe there would have been more losses, with the bridge still left standing. I thought you wanted the bridge destroyed. Don't contradict me, Colonel Cathcart said. We're all in enough trouble. I'm not contradicting you, sir. Yes, you are. Even that's a contradiction. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Colonel Cathcart cracked his knuckles violently. Colonel Corn, a stocky, dark, flaccid man with a shapeless paunch, sat completely relaxed on one of the benches in the front row, his hands clasped comfortably over the top of his bald and swarthy head. His eyes were amused behind his glinting rimless spectacles. "We are trying to be perfectly objective about this," he prompted Colonel Cathcart. "We are trying to be perfectly objective about this," Colonel Cathcart said to Yossarian with the zeal of sudden inspiration. "It's not that I'm being sentimental or anything. I don't give a damn about the men or the airplane. It's just that it looks so lousy on the report. How am I going to cover up something like this in the report? Why don't you give me a medal?" Yossarian suggested timidly. "For going around twice? You gave one to Hungry Joe when he cracked up that airplane by mistake." Colonel Cathcart snickered ruefully. "You'll be lucky if we don't give you a court-martial." "But I got the bridge the second time around," Yossarian protested. "I thought you wanted the bridge destroyed." "Oh, I don't know what I wanted," Colonel Cathcart cried out in exasperation. "Look, of course I wanted the bridge destroyed. That bridge has been a source of trouble to me ever since I decided to send you men out to get it. But why couldn't you do it the first time?" "I didn't have enough time. My navigator wasn't sure we had the right city." "The right city?" Colonel Cathcart was baffled. "Are you trying to blame it all on Arfie now?" "No, sir. It was my mistake for letting him distract me. All I'm trying to say is that I'm not infallible." "Nobody is infallible," Colonel Cathcart said sharply, and then continued vaguely, with an afterthought, "Nobody is indispensable, either." There was no rebuttal. Colonel Corn stretched sluggishly. "We've got to reach a decision," he observed casually to Colonel Cathcart. "We've got to reach a decision," Colonel Cathcart said to Yossarian. "And it's all your fault. Why did you have to go around twice? Why couldn't you drop your bombs the first time like all the others?" "I would have missed the first time." "It seems to me that we're going around twice," Colonel Corn interrupted with a chuckle. "But what are we going to do?" Colonel Cathcart exclaimed with distress. "The others are all waiting outside. Why don't we give him a medal?" Colonel Corn proposed. "For going around twice? What can we give him a medal for?" "For going around twice," Colonel Corn answered with a reflective, self-satisfied smile. "After all, I suppose it did take a lot of courage to go over that target a second time with no other planes around to divert the anti-aircraft fire. And he did hit the bridge. You know, that might be the answer, to act boastfully about something we ought to be ashamed of. That's a trick that never seems to fail. Do you think it will work?" "I am sure it will. And let's promote him to captain, too, just to make certain." "Don't you think that's going a bit farther than we have to?" "No, I don't think so. It's best to play safe. And a captain's not much difference." "All right," Colonel Cathcart decided. "We'll give him a medal for being brave enough to go around over the target twice. And we'll make him a captain, too." Colonel Corn reached for his hat. "Exit smiling," he joked, and put his arm around Yossarian's shoulders as they stepped outside the door. 14 Kid Sampson. By the time of the mission to Bologna, Yossarian was brave enough not to go around over the target even once, and when he found himself aloft finally in the nose of Kid Sampson's plane, he pressed in the button of his throat mic and asked, "Well? What's wrong with the plane?" Kid Sampson let out a shriek. "Is something wrong with the plane? What's the matter?" Kid Sampson's cry turned Yossarian to ice. "Is something the matter?" he yelled in horror. "Are we bailing out?" "I don't know." Kid Sampson shot back in anguish, wailing excitedly. "Someone said we're bailing out. Who is this, anyway? Who is this?" "This is Yossarian in the nose." "Yossarian in the nose. I heard you say there was something the matter. Didn't you say there was something the matter? I thought you said there was something wrong." Everything seems okay. Everything is all right. Yossarian's heart sank. Something was terribly wrong if everything was all right and they had no excuse for turning back. He hesitated gravely. "I can't hear you," he said. "I said everything is all right." The sun was blinding white on the porcelain blue water below and on the flashing edges of the other airplanes. Yossarian took hold of the colored wires leading into the jackbox of the intercom system and tore them loose. "I still can't hear you," he said. He heard nothing. Slowly he collected his map case and his 3 flak suits and crawled back to the main compartment. Nately, sitting stiffly in the co-pilot's seat, spied him through the corner of his eye as he stepped up on the flight deck behind Kid Sampson. He smiled at Yossarian wanly, looking frail and exceptionally young and bashful in the bulky dungeon of his earphones, hat, throat mic, flak suit and parachute. Yossarian bent close to Kid Sampson's ear. "I still can't hear you," he shouted above the even drone of the engines. Kid Sampson glanced back at him with surprise. Kid Sampson had an angular, comical face with arched eyebrows and a scrawny blonde mustache. "What?" he called out over his shoulder. "I still can't hear you," Yossarian repeated. "You'll have to talk louder," Kid Sampson said. "I still can't hear you." "I said I still can't hear you," Yossarian yelled. "I can't help it," Kid Sampson yelled back at him. "I'm shouting as loud as I can." "I couldn't hear you over my intercom," Yossarian bellowed in mounting helplessness. "You'll have to turn back." "For an intercom?" asked Kid Sampson incredulously. "Turn back," said Yossarian, "before I break your head." Kid Sampson looked for moral support toward Nately, who stared away from him pointedly. Yossarian outranked them both. Kid Sampson resisted doubtfully for another moment and then capitulated eagerly with a triumphant whoop. "That's just fine with me," he announced gladly, and blew out a shrill series of whistles up into his mustache. "Yes sirree, that's just fine with old Kid Sampson." He whistled again and shouted over the intercom, "Now hear this, my little chickadees. This is Admiral Kid Sampson talking. This is Admiral Kid Sampson squawking, the pride of the Queen's Marines. Yes'ree. We're turning back, boys, by cracky, we're turning back." Nately ripped off his hat and earphones in one jubilant sweep and began rocking back and forth happily like a handsome child in a high chair. Sergeant Knight came plummeting down from the Trop gun turret and began pounding them all on the back with delirious enthusiasm. Kid Sampson turned the plane away from the formation in a wide, graceful arc and headed toward the airfield. When Yossarian plugged his headset into one of the auxiliary jackboxes, the 2 gunners in the rear section of the plane were both singing La Cucaracha. Back at the field, the party fizzled out abruptly. An uneasy silence replaced it, and Yossarian was sober and self-conscious as he climbed down from the plane and took his place in the jeep that was already waiting for them. None of the men spoke at all on the drive back through the heavy, mesmerizing quiet blanketing mountains, sea and forests. The feeling of desolation persisted when they turned off the road at the squadron. Yossarian got out of the car last. After a minute, Yossarian and a gentle warm wind were the only things stirring in the haunting tranquility that hung like a drug over the vacated tents. The squadron stood insensate, bereft of everything human but Doc Danica, who roosted dolorously like a shivering turkey buzzard beside the closed door of the medical tent, his stuffed nose jabbing away in thirsting futility at the hazy sunlight streaming down around him. Yossarian knew Doc Danica would not go swimming with him. Doc Danica would never go swimming again. A person could swoon or suffer a mild coronary occlusion in an inch or 2 of water and drown to death, be carried out to sea by an undertow, or made vulnerable to poliomyelitis or meningococcus infection through chilling or overexertion. The threat of baloney to others had instilled in Doc Danica an even more poignant solicitude for his own safety. At night now, he heard burglars. Through the lavender gloom clouding the entrance of the operations tent, Yossarian glimpsed Chief White Half-Oat, diligently embezzling whiskey rations, forging the signatures of non-drinkers and pouring off the alcohol with which he was poisoning himself into separate bottles rapidly in order to steal as much as he could before Captain Black roused himself with recollection and came hurrying over indolently to steal the rest himself. The jeep started up again softly. Kid Sampson, Nately and the others wandered apart in a noiseless eddy of motion and were sucked away into the cloying yellow stillness. The jeep vanished with a cough. Yossarian was alone in a ponderous, primeval lull in which everything green looked black and everything else was imbued with the color of pus. The breeze rustled leaves in a dry and diaphanous distance. He was restless, scared and sleepy. The sockets of his eyes felt grimy with exhaustion. Wearily he moved inside the parachute tent with its long table of smoothed wood, a nagging bitch of a doubt burrowing painlessly inside a conscience that felt perfectly clear. He left his flak suit and parachute there and crossed back past the water wagon to the intelligence tent to return his map case to Captain Black, who sat drowsing in his chair with his skinny long legs up on his desk and inquired with indifferent curiosity why Yossarian's plane had turned back. Yossarian ignored him. He set the map down on the counter and walked out. Back in his own tent, he squirmed out of his parachute harness and then out of his clothes. Or was in Rome, due back that same afternoon from the rest leave he had won by ditching his plane in the waters off Genoa. Nately would already be packing to replace him, entranced to find himself still alive and undoubtedly impatient to resume his wasted and heartbreaking courtship of his prostitute in Rome. When Yossarian was undressed, he sat down on his cot to rest. He felt much better as soon as he was naked. He never felt comfortable in clothes. In a little while he put fresh undershirts back on and set out for the beach in his moccasins, a khaki-colored bath towel draped over his shoulders. The path from the squadron led him around a mysterious gun emplacement in the woods. Two of the three enlisted men stationed there lay sleeping on the circle of sandbags and the third sat eating a purple pomegranate, biting off large mouthfuls between his churning jaws and spewing the ground roughage out away from him into the bushes. When he bit, red juice ran out of his mouth. Yossarian padded ahead into the forest again, caressing his bare, tingling belly adoringly from time to time as though to reassure himself it was all still there. He rolled a piece of lint out of his navel. Along the ground suddenly, on both sides of the path, he saw dozens of new mushrooms the rain had spawned poking their nodular fingers up through the clammy earth like lifeless stalks of flesh, sprouting in such necrotic profusion everywhere he looked that they seemed to be proliferating right before his eyes. There were thousands of them swarming as far back into the underbrush as he could see, and they appeared to swell in size and multiply in number as he spied them. He hurried away from them with a shiver of eerie alarm and did not slacken his pace until the soil crumbled to dry sand beneath his feet and they had been left behind. He glanced back apprehensively, half expecting to find the limp white things crawling after him in sightless pursuit or snaking up through the treetops in a writhing and ungovernable mutative mass. The beach was deserted. The only sounds were hushed ones, the bloated gurgle of the stream, the respirating hum of the tall grass and shrubs behind him, the apathetic moaning of the dumb, translucent waves. The surf was always small, the water clear and cool. Yossarian left his things on the sand and moved through the knee-high waves until he was completely immersed. On the other side of the sea, a bumpy sliver of dark land lay wrapped in mist, almost invisible. He swam languorously out to the raft, held on a moment, and swam languorously back to where he could stand on the sandbar. He submerged himself head first into the green water several times until he felt clean and wide awake and then stretched himself out face down in the sand and slept until the planes returning from Bologna were almost overhead and the great, cumulative rumble of their many engines came crashing in through his slumber in an earth-shattering roar. He woke up blinking with a slight pain in his head and opened his eyes upon a world boiling in chaos in which everything was in proper order. He gasped in utter amazement at the fantastic sight of the 12 flights of planes organized calmly into exact formation. The scene was too unexpected to be true. There were no planes spurting ahead with wounded, none lagging behind with damage. No distress flares smoked in the sky. No ship was missing but his own. For an instant he was paralyzed with a sensation of madness. Then he understood, and almost wept at the irony. The explanation was simple: clouds had covered the target before the planes could bomb it, and the mission to Bologna was still to be flown. He was wrong. There had been no clouds. Bologna had been bombed. Bologna was a milk run. There had been no flak there at all. 15 Pilchard and Wren, Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren, the inoffensive Joint Squadron Operations officers, were both mild, soft-spoken men of less than middle height who enjoyed flying combat missions and begged nothing more of life and Colonel Cathcart than the opportunity to continue flying them. They had flown hundreds of combat missions and wanted to fly hundreds more. They assigned themselves to every one. Nothing so wonderful as war had ever happened to them before, and they were afraid it might never happen to them again. They conducted their duties humbly and reticently, with a minimum of fuss, and went to great lengths not to antagonize anyone. They smiled quickly at everyone they passed. When they spoke, they mumbled. They were shifty, cheerful, subservient men who were comfortable only with each other and never met anyone else's eye. Not even Yossarian's eye. At the open-air meeting they called to reprimand him publicly for making kidsaps and turn back from the mission to Bologna. "Fellas," said Captain Pilchard, who had thinning dark hair and smiled awkwardly. "When you turn back from a mission, try to make sure it's for something important, will you? Not for something unimportant. Like a defective intercom. Or something like that. Okay? Captain Wren has more he wants to say to you on that subject." "Captain Pilchard's right, fellas," said Captain Wren. "And that's all I'm going to say to you on that subject. Well, we finally got to Bologna today, and we found out it's a milk run. We were all a little nervous, I guess, and didn't do too much damage. Well, listen to this. Colonel Cathcart got permission for us to go back. And tomorrow we're really going to paste those ammunition dumps. Now, what do you think about that?" And to prove to Yossarian that they bore him no animosity, they even assigned him to fly lead bombardier with Mquat in the first formation when they went back to Bologna the next day. He came in on the target like a Havermeyer, confidently taking no evasive action at all, and suddenly they were shooting the living shit out of him. Heavy flak was everywhere. He had been lulled, lured and trapped, and there was nothing he could do but sit there like an idiot and watch the ugly black puffs smashing up to kill him. There was nothing he could do until his bombs dropped but look back into the bomb sight, where the fine crosshairs in the lens were glued magnetically over the target exactly where he had placed them, intersecting perfectly deep inside the yard of his block of camouflaged warehouses before the base of the first building. He was trembling steadily as the plane crept ahead. He could hear the hollow boom 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 of the flak pounding all around him in overlapping measures of 4, the sharp, piercing crack of a single shell exploding suddenly very close by. His head was bursting with 1,000 dissonant impulses as he prayed for the bombs to drop. He wanted to sob. The engines droned on monotonously like a fat, lazy fly. At last the indices on the bomb sight crossed, tripping away the 8 500-pounders one after the other. The plane lurched upward buoyantly with the lightened load. Yossarian bent away from the bomb sight crookedly to watch the indicator on his left. When the pointer touched 0, he closed the bomb bay doors and, over the intercom, at the very top of his voice, shrieked, "Turn right hard." Mquat responded instantly. With a grinding howl of engines, he flipped the plane over on one wing and wrung it around remorselessly in a screaming turn away from the twin spires of flak Yossarian had spied stabbing toward them. Then Yossarian had Mquat climb and keep climbing higher and higher until they tore free finally into a calm, diamond blue sky that was sunny and pure everywhere and laced in the distance with long white veils of tenuous fluff. The wind strummed soothingly against the cylindrical panes of his windows, and he relaxed exultantly only until they picked up speed again and then turned Mquat left and plunged him right back down, noticing with a transitory spasm of elation the mushrooming clusters of flak leaping open high above him and back over his shoulder to the right, exactly where he could have been if he had not turned left and dived. He leveled Mquat out with another harsh cry and whipped him upward and around again into a ragged blue patch of unpolluted air just as the bombs he had dropped began to strike. The first one fell in the yard, exactly where he had aimed, and then the rest of the bombs from his own plane and from the other planes in his flight burst open on the ground in a charge of rapid orange flashes across the tops of the buildings, which collapsed instantly in a vast, turning wave of pink and gray and coal-black smoke that went rolling out turbulently in all directions and quaked convulsively in its bowels as though from great blasts of red and white and golden sheet lightning. "Well, will you look at that?" Arfi marveled sonorously right beside Yossarian, his plump, orbicular face sparkling with a look of bright enchantment. There must have been an ammunition dump down there. Yossarian had forgotten about Arfi. "Get out!" he shouted at him. "Get out of the nose." Arfi smiled politely and pointed down toward the target in a generous invitation for Yossarian to look. Yossarian began slapping at him insistently and signaled wildly toward the entrance of the crawlway. "Get back in the ship!" he cried frantically. "Get back in the ship!" Arfi shrugged amiably. "I can't hear you," he explained. Yossarian seized him by the straps of his parachute harness and pushed him backward toward the crawlway just as the plane was hit with a jarring concussion that rattled his bones and made his heart stop. He knew at once they were all dead. "Climb!" he screamed into the intercom at Mquat when he saw he was still alive. "Climb, you bastard! Climb, 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 climb!" The plane zoomed upward again in a climb that was swift and straining, until he leveled it out with another harsh shout at Mquat and wrenched it around once more in a roaring, merciless 45-degree turn that sucked his insides out in one enervating sniff and left him floating fleshless in midair until he leveled Mquat out again just long enough to hurl him back around toward the right and then down into a screeching dive. Through endless blobs of ghostly black smoke he sped, the hanging smut wafting against the smooth plexiglass nose of the ship like an evil, damp, sooty vapor against his cheeks. His heart was hammering again in aching terror as he hurtled upward and downward through the blind gangs of flak charging murderously into the sky at him, then sagging inertly. Sweat gushed from his neck in torrents and poured down over his chest and waist with the feeling of warm slime. He was vaguely aware for an instant that the planes in his formation were no longer there, and then he was aware of only himself. His throat hurt like a raw slash from the strangling intensity with which he shrieked each command to Mquat. The engines rose to a deafening, agonized, ululating bellow each time Mquat changed direction. And far out in front the bursts of flak were still swarming into the sky from new batteries of guns poking around for accurate altitude as they waited sadistically for him to fly into range. The plane was slammed again suddenly with another loud, jarring explosion that almost rocked it over on its back, and the nose filled immediately with sweet clouds of blue smoke. Something was on fire. Yossarian whirled to escape and smacked into Arfi, who had struck a match and was placidly lighting his pipe. Yossarian gaped at his grinning, moon-faced navigator in utter shock and confusion. It occurred to him that one of them was mad. "Jesus Christ!" he screamed at Arfi in tortured amazement. "Get the hell out of the nose! Are you crazy? Get out!" "What?" said Arfi. "Get out!" Yossarian yelled hysterically, and began clubbing Arfi backhanded with both fists to drive him away. "Get out!" "I still can't hear you," Arfi called back innocently with an expression of mild and reproving perplexity. "You'll have to talk a little louder. Get out of the nose!" Yossarian shrieked in frustration. "They're trying to kill us. Don't you understand? They're trying to kill us. Which way should I go, God damn it?" Mquat shouted furiously over the intercom in a suffering, high-pitched voice. "Which way should I go? Turn left. Left, you goddamn dirty son of a bitch. Turn left hard." Arfi crept up close behind Yossarian and jabbed him sharply in the ribs with the stem of his pipe. Yossarian flew up toward the ceiling with a whinnying cry, then jumped completely around on his knees, white as a sheet and quivering with rage. Arfi winked encouragingly and jerked his thumb back toward Mquat with a humorous "What's eating him?" he asked with a laugh. Yossarian was struck with a weird sense of distortion. "Will you get out of here?" he yelped beseechingly, and shoved Arfi over with all his strength. "Are you deaf or something? Get back in the plane." And to Mquat he screamed, "Dive! Dive!" Down they sank once more into the crunching, thudding, voluminous barrage of bursting anti-aircraft shells as Arfi came creeping back behind Yossarian and jabbed him sharply in the ribs again. Yossarian shied upward with another whinnying gasp. "I still couldn't hear you," Arfi said. "I said get out of here!" Yossarian shouted, and broke into tears. He began punching Arfi in the body with both hands as hard as he could. "Get away from me! Get away!" Punching Arfi was like sinking his fists into a limp sack of inflated rubber. There was no resistance, no response at all from the soft, insensitive mass, and after a while Yossarian's spirit died and his arms dropped helplessly with exhaustion. He was overcome with a humiliating feeling of impotence and was ready to weep in self-pity. "What did you say?" Arfi asked. "Get away from me," Yossarian answered, pleading with him now. "Go back in the plane. I still can't hear you." "Never mind," wailed Yossarian, "never mind. Just leave me alone." "Never mind what?" Yossarian began hitting himself in the forehead. He seized Arfi by the shirt front and, struggling to his feet for traction, dragged him to the rear of the nose compartment and flung him down like a bloated and unwieldy bag in the entrance of the crawlway. A shell banged open with a stupendous clout right beside his ear as he was scrambling back toward the front, and some undestroyed recess of his intelligence wondered that it did not kill them all. They were climbing again. The engines were howling again as though in pain, and the air inside the plane was acrid with the smell of machinery and fetid with the stench of gasoline. The next thing he knew, it was snowing. Thousands of tiny bits of white paper were falling like snowflakes inside the plane, milling around his head so thickly that they clung to his eyelashes when he blinked in astonishment and fluttered against his nostrils and lips each time he inhaled. When he spun around in his bewilderment, Arfi was grinning proudly from ear to ear like something inhuman as he held up a shattered paper map for Yossarian to see. A large chunk of flak had ripped up from the floor through Arfi's colossal jumble of maps and had ripped out through the ceiling inches away from their heads. Arfi's joy was sublime. "Will you look at this?" he murmured, waggling two of his stubby fingers playfully into Yossarian's face through the hole in one of his maps. "Will you look at this?" Yossarian was dumbfounded by his state of rapturous contentment. Arfi was like a neary ogre in a dream, incapable of being bruised or evaded, and Yossarian dreaded him for a complex of reasons he was too petrified to untangle. Wind whistling up through the jagged gash in the floor kept the myriad bits of paper circulating like alabaster particles in a paperweight and contributed to a sensation of lacquered, waterlogged unreality. Everything seemed strange, so tawdry and grotesque. His head was throbbing from a shrill clamor that drilled relentlessly into both ears. It was Mquat, begging for directions in an incoherent frenzy. Yossarian continued staring in tormented fascination at Arfi's spherical countenance beaming at him so serenely and vacantly through the drifting whirls of white paper bits and concluded that he was a raving lunatic just as 8 bursts of flak broke open successively at eye level off to the right, then 8 more, and then 8 more. The last group pulled over toward the left so that they were almost directly in front. "Turn left hard," he hollered to Mquat, as Arfi kept grinning, and Mquat did turn left hard, but the flak turned left hard with them, catching up fast, and Yossarian hollered, "I said hard, 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 you bastard, hard." And Mquat bent the plane around even harder still, and suddenly, miraculously, they were out of range. The flak ended. The guns stopped booming at them. And they were alive. Behind him, men were dying. Strung out for miles in a stricken, tortuous, squirming line, The other flights of planes were making the same hazardous journey over the target, threading their swift way through the swollen masses of new and old bursts of flak like rats racing in a pack through their own droppings. One was on fire, and flapped lamely off by itself, billowing gigantically like a monstrous blood-red star. As Yossarian watched, the burning plane floated over on its side and began spiraling down slowly in wide, tremulous, narrowing circles, its huge flaming burden blazing orange and flaring out and back like a long, swirling cape of fire and smoke. There were parachutes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the plane gyrated into a spin and fell the rest of the way to the ground, fluttering insensibly inside its vivid fire like a shred of colored tissue paper. One whole flight of planes from another squadron had been blasted apart. Yossarian sighed barrenly, his day's work done. He was listless and sticky. The engines crooned mellifluously as Mquat throttled back to loiter and allow the rest of the planes in his flight to catch up. The abrupt stillness seemed alien and artificial, a little insidious. Yossarian unsnapped his flak suit and took off his helmet. He sighed again, restlessly, and closed his eyes and tried to relax. "Where's Or?" someone asked suddenly over his intercom. Yossarian bounded up with a one-syllable cry that crackled with anxiety and provided the only rational explanation for the whole mysterious phenomenon of the flak at Bologna, Or. He lunged forward over the bomb site to search downward through the plexiglass for some reassuring sign of Or, who drew flak like a magnet and who had undoubtedly attracted the crack batteries of the whole Hermann Göring division to Bologna overnight from wherever the hell they had been stationed the day before when Or was still in Rome. Arfi launched himself forward an instant later and cracked Yossarian on the bridge of the nose with the sharp rim of his flak helmet. Yossarian cursed him as his eyes flooded with tears. "There he is," Arfi orated funereally, pointing down dramatically at a hay wagon and 2 horses standing before the barn of a grey stone farmhouse. "Smashed to bits. I guess their numbers were all up." Yossarian swore at Arfi again and continued searching intently, cold with a compassionate kind of fear now for the little bouncy and bizarre buck-toothed tent mate who had smashed Appleby's forehead open with a ping-pong racket and who was scaring the daylights out of Yossarian once again. At last Yossarian spotted the 2-engined, twin-ruddered plane as it flew out of the green background of the forests over a field of yellow farmland. One of the propellers was feathered and perfectly still, but the plane was maintaining altitude and holding a proper course. Yossarian muttered an unconscious prayer of thankfulness and then flared up at Or savagely in a ranting fusion of resentment and relief. "That bastard!" he began. "That goddamn stunted, red-faced, big-cheeked, curly-headed, buck-toothed rat bastard son of a bitch." "What?" said Arfi. "That dirty goddamn midget-assed, apple-cheeked, goggle-eyed, undersized, buck-toothed, grinning, crazy sono-fabichin bastard." Yossarian sputtered. "What?" "Never mind. I still can't hear you," Arfi answered. Yossarian swung himself around methodically to face Arfi. "You prick," he began. "Me? You pompous, rotund, neighborly, vacuous, complacent." Arfi was unperturbed. Cowardly he struck a wooden match and sucked noisily at his pipe with an eloquent air of benign and magnanimous forgiveness. He smiled sociably and opened his mouth to speak. Yossarian put his hand over Arfi's mouth and pushed him away wearily. He shut his eyes and pretended to sleep all the way back to the field so that he would not have to listen to Arfi or see him. At the briefing room Yossarian made his intelligence report to Captain Black and then waited in muttering suspense with all the others until Or chugged into sight overhead finally with his one good engine still keeping him aloft gamely. Nobody breathed. Or's landing gear would not come down. Yossarian hung around only until Or had crash-landed safely, and then stole the first jeep he could find with a key in the ignition and raced back to his tent to begin packing feverishly for the emergency rest leave he had decided to take in Rome, where he found Luciana and her invisible scar that same night. 16 Luciana He found Luciana sitting alone at a table in the Allied officers' nightclub, where the drunken Anzac major who had brought her there had been stupid enough to desert her for the ribald company of some singing comrades at the bar. "All right, I'll dance with you," she said, before Yossarian could even speak. "But I won't let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" Yossarian asked her. "You don't want to sleep with me?" she exclaimed with surprise. "I don't want to dance with you." She seized Yossarian's hand and pulled him out on the dance floor. She was a worse dancer than even he was, but she threw herself about to the synthetic jitterbug music with more uninhibited pleasure than he had ever observed until he felt his legs falling asleep with boredom and yanked her off the dance floor toward the table at which the girl he should have been screwing was still sitting tipsily with one hand around Arfie's neck, her orange satin blouse still hanging open slovenly below her full white lacy brassiere as she made dirty sex talk ostentatiously with Hoople, or Kid Sampson, and Hungry Joe. Just as he reached them, Luciana gave him a forceful, unexpected shove that carried them both well beyond the table, so that they were still alone. She was a tall, earthy, exuberant girl with long hair and a pretty face, a buxom, delightful, flirtatious girl. "All right," she said, "I will let you buy me dinner. But I won't let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" Yossarian asked with surprise. "You don't want to sleep with me?" "I don't want to buy you dinner." She pulled him out of the nightclub into the street and down a flight of steps into a black market restaurant filled with lively, chirping, attractive girls who all seemed to know each other and with the self-conscious military officers from different countries who had come there with them. The food was elegant and expensive, and the aisles were overflowing with great streams of flushed and merry proprietors, all stout and balding. The bustling interior radiated with enormous, engulfing waves of fun and warmth. Yossarian got a tremendous kick out of the rude gusto with which Luciana ignored him completely while she shoveled away her whole meal with both hands. She ate like a horse until the last plate was clean, and then she placed her silverware down with an air of conclusion and settled back lazily in her chair with a dreamy and congested look of sated gluttony. She drew a deep, smiling, contented breath and regarded him amorously with a melting gaze. "Okay, Joe," she purred, her glowing dark eyes drowsy and grateful. "Now I will let you sleep with me. My name is Yossarian." "Okay, Yossarian," she answered with a soft repentant laugh. "Now I will let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" said Yossarian. Luciana was stunned. "You don't want to sleep with me?" Yossarian nodded emphatically, laughing, and shot his hand up under her dress. The girl came to life with a horrified start. She jerked her legs away from him instantly, whipping her bottom around. Blushing with alarm and embarrassment, she pushed her skirt back down with a number of prim, sidelong glances about the restaurant. "Now I will let you sleep with me," she explained cautiously in a manner of apprehensive indulgence. "But not now." "I know. When we get back to my room." The girl shook her head, eyeing him mistrustfully and keeping her knees pressed together. "No, now I must go home to my mama, because my mama does not like me to dance with soldiers or let them take me to dinner, and she will be very angry with me if I do not come home now. But I will let you write down for me where you live. And tomorrow morning I will come to your room for ficky fic before I go to my work at the French office." "Capacy? Bullshit!" Yossarian exclaimed with angry disappointment. "Kosovo dire bullshit?" Luciana inquired with a blank look. Yossarian broke into loud laughter. He answered her finally in a tone of sympathetic good humor. "It means that I want to escort you now to wherever the hell I have to take you next so that I can rush back to that nightclub before Arfie leaves with that wonderful tomato he's got without giving me a chance to ask about an aunt or friend she must have who's just like her. Come? Subito, subito," he taunted her tenderly. "Mama is waiting. Remember? See. Mama." Yossarian let the girl drag him through the lovely Roman spring night for almost a mile until they reached a chaotic bus depot honking with horns, blazing with red and yellow lights and echoing with the snarling vituperations of unshaven bus drivers pouring loathsome, hair-raising curses out at each other, At their passengers and at the strolling, unconcerned knots of pedestrians clogging their paths, who ignored them until they were bumped by the buses and began shouting curses back. Luciana vanished aboard one of the diminutive green vehicles, and Yossarian hurried as fast as he could all the way back to the cabaret and the bleary-eyed bleached blonde in the open orange satin blouse. She seemed infatuated with Arfi, but he prayed intensely for her luscious aunt as he ran, or for a luscious girlfriend, sister, cousin, or mother who was just as libidinous and depraved. She would have been perfect for Yossarian, a debauched, coarse, vulgar, amoral, appetizing slattern whom he had longed for and idolized for months. She was a real find. She paid for her own drinks, and she had an automobile, an apartment and a salmon-colored cameo ring that drove Hungry Joe clean out of his senses with its exquisitely carved figures of a naked boy and girl on a rock. Hungry Joe snorted and pranced and pawed at the floor in salivating lust and groveling need, but the girl would not sell him the ring, even though he offered her all the money in all their pockets and his complicated black camera thrown in. She was not interested in money or cameras. She was interested in fornication. She was gone when Yossarian got there. They were all gone, and he walked right out and moved in wistful dejection through the dark, emptying streets. Yossarian was not often lonely when he was by himself, but he was lonely now in his keen envy of Arfi, who he knew was in bed that very moment with the girl who was just right for Yossarian, and who could also make out any time he wanted to, if he ever wanted to, with either or both of the two slender, stunning, aristocratic women who lived in the apartment upstairs and fructified Yossarian's sex fantasies whenever he had sex fantasies, the beautiful rich black-haired countess with the red, wet, nervous lips and her beautiful rich black-haired daughter-in-law. Yossarian was madly in love with all of them as he made his way back to the officer's apartment, in love with Luciana, with the prurient intoxicated girl in the unbuttoned satin blouse, and with the beautiful rich countess and her beautiful rich daughter-in-law, both of whom would never let him touch them or even flirt with them. They doted kittenishly on Nately and deferred passively to Arfi, but they thought Yossarian was crazy and recoiled from him with distasteful contempt each time he made an indecent proposal or tried to fondle them when they passed on the stairs. They were both superb creatures with pulpy, bright, pointed tongues and mouths like round warm plums, a little sweet and sticky, a little rotten. They had class. Yossarian was not sure what class was, but he knew that they had it and he did not, and that they knew it, too. He could picture, as he walked, the kind of underclothing they wore against their svelte feminine parts, filmy, smooth, clinging garments of deepest black or of opalescent pastel radiance with flowering lace borders fragrant with the tantalizing fumes of pampered flesh and scented bath salts rising in a germinating cloud from their blue-white breasts. He wished again that he was where Arfi was, making obscene, brutal, cheerful love with a juicy drunken tart who didn't give a tinker's damn about him and would never think of him again. But Arfi was already back in the apartment when Yossarian arrived, and Yossarian gaped at him with that same sense of persecuted astonishment he had suffered that same morning over baloney at his malign and cabalistic and irremovable presence in the nose of the plane.